Welcome to Teacher Voices on the Science of Reading podcast, featuring educators from classrooms around the country. I'm your host, Shadi Tayarani, and today we will be discussing lexical quality and its critical role in the classroom when it comes to learning to read. We'll dive deep into what lexical quality is, why it matters, and how it impacts students. A quick introduction about me. I'm a career educator in my 25th year teaching. I've worked in public schools in Texas, Massachusetts, and currently North Carolina. I've always worked in special education. I've had a keen interest in research-based practices to reach diverse learners. And in addition to teaching, I have a consulting practice and offer professional development to schools around best practices in reading instruction, universal design, and promoting equitable access for all learners. I'm really excited about this series because it involves other educators and we'll be sounding off for a 6-part Teacher Voices series all about literacy and topics relevant to the science of reading. Today's Teacher Voices Roundtable guests are Denise Resendez, who's a 3rd grade teacher currently with international teaching background. She has lots of years teaching in Brazil, and in addition to her teaching duties during the day, she's got a thriving tutoring practice. My other guest is Andrea Lowry, who's a 1st grade teacher with over 20 years in education, and she's currently in Pensacola, Florida. Welcome, ladies.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
It's so great to be here. You know, the term lexical quality, and of course, the why should educators care? I think in our practice, we're actually always thinking about lexical quality. We might just not be calling it lexical quality. So I want to start with the basics on what it is and why we should be paying attention to it. So we know that vocabulary is one of the National Reading Panel's pillars of reading instruction. So I can see everyone nodding along. We've heard those pillars of just constantly as we think about reading instruction. We think about phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and comprehension along with vocabulary. But the thing is that all of those pillars, which may seem like 5 unique entities, are hugely interconnected. We know from research that just confirms our gut instincts as educators that if we want a student to truly know a word, we know that the student needs to know the phonology of the word, the orthography, the syntax, the semantics, and the morphology. So basically, when students have all of those pieces solidified, they know the word. And we've all experienced when students don't know the word, because one day we teach it to them and the next day they look at us like they've never seen it before. And that's because the fancy way to say their lexical quality for that word is weak. So in the 1980s, that's when that term was qualified in this hypothesis by Charles Perfetti and Leslie Hart out of the University of Pittsburgh. They described the lexical quality hypothesis, saying that students need the phonology, orthography, syntax, and semantics of a word. And the higher the accuracy and understanding that a student has of a word in each of those domains, the better the lexical quality, and ultimately the better the student's comprehension. So what do you all think of that lexical quality hypothesis? That maybe as teachers, we've never even heard that hypothesis, but how does that hypothesis play out in your classrooms?
Well, I like to think of it in my classroom as structured discovery, in that I am choosing very specific words that are very high impact. Like, for example, in 1st grade, we're learning about our community. And so we use the word community, and I relate it across all content areas. And we look at how community means togetherness, but even when we look at math, there's the commutative property. And we just kind of play with words where it's like, I call it structured discovery, because I'm pre-planning what I want to do, but I make it look like, oh my goodness, look at this. We just learned about community and now we're doing math. And here's, the same beginning sound. So I kind of point it out and get them excited about words at the early level, and to know that, and that's just one of the layers of it.
That's awesome. And I think that's like a perfect example of building lexical quality. We talk about semantics and giving students multiple opportunities to basically touch a word, right? So we're not going to just teach it to you once and expect that you're going to know it. Wish it could be that easy, but we know that students need multiple touches across various contexts. So that's so awesome, Andrea, that you're like building that in that magical teacher way where the students don't even know that you're doing it.
And it's very intentional. I think that's the thing, and a lot of repetition throughout the day. And when we're transitioning from places, it's like, oh, what was that word we were learning about? And or you just bring it up again and again, where they have that repetition. That's so important.
Yeah.
Denise, how do you
Yeah.
use it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to piggyback on what you're saying, and I can't agree more. I think what you're talking about too, when you talk about when we talk about these fancy words for what we're really doing in the classroom, and what probably a lot of us has been doing for a long time and continue to do. We just maybe didn't put a name on it, a label on it, but I think the hypothesis you brought up really does sort of help validate everything we are doing and we're aware of and we're conscious of as teachers, as literacy teacher, right? We are teaching language all day long in every single context, in every single area, content area reading, whether we're talking about silent reading in their head, right? When we pair them up to do fluency readings, we're constantly stressing the need to emphasize the language and to talk about what those vocabulary words read, right? Those rich vocabulary words. I like to call them $1,000,000 words. I like to get them excited about words. I like to tell them that they're wordsmiths, right? We're constantly curating sort of this curiosity for words all day long, whether through song, through poetry. I mean, teachers have been doing it forever, right? So this is good that we're talking about this. And I think with all the, not only the research, but also the scores that have been released to the public, and they're all in the news right now about comprehension and how difficult it is, even for our, thriving readers, our readers who are independent and confident and love reading and identify as readers, right? Even for them, comprehension on their test scores is an issue, right? So I think that this has been something that I've been like fishing for on my own, like trying to find the answers. How do I curate more comprehension, scenarios in my classroom? How do I help build that background knowledge? Yes, through vocabulary, but also through really having them hone in on the devices that we are presenting them with in our text, right? And we know that young readers, right, once they're reading, they're not hearing it in the speech like they were in their early years of schooling, right? They are mostly reading it in text. So we have to really just double duty and make a big deal of language all day long. So for me, it's everything. It is the icing on the cake. It is everything I do is around this. I just never had a name for it.
Yeah, I
It
know. It's funny. I was reading a whole bunch of research. I mean, we're all a
Mhm.
science of reading nerds, so we read this stuff
Yes.
all the time anyways, but I was just reading a little extra on lexical quality, and just all these studies that confirm, I think, what we've been seeing in practice from decades of working with students. So I just want to read some of these snippets that I pulled out from some more recent studies. So lexical quality, that hypothesis did originate in the 80s, but there's been just lots of research since then that sort of confirms what lexical quality hypothesis brought to us in the 80s and what we've been thinking. So one snippet I pulled out of Stephen Stahl and William Nagy's work They said that academic vocabulary is one of the strongest indicators of how well students will learn subject area content.
Yes.
And another one from them is academic vocabulary is crucial to improving both reading comprehension and verbal IQ. So I
Yeah.
want to start with those two little snippets and tell me what reactions you have to that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna jump in. That just makes me immediately think about like cohesion and cohesion in their not only in reading but in their writing, right? And we know that reading and writing have to be paired and have to be connected in all levels in every area of our teaching, right? We know that that just makes a huge difference in their learning and building their comprehension, deepening their understanding. But I think that as I work one-on-one with students, I'm also finding myself reaching for those golden nuggets to bring into the not only my classroom but in my private practice. And so one of the things I've been looking at lately is teaching cohesive devices. And how can I do that in the lower primary level? Like, how can I present all of those words that sort of signal, like device wise, right? Devices do something, they have a role. And so, how do I teach my students to look out for those words? And how do those devices also act as pronouns so that when they're reading, right, in their text and they're reading for the tests, that they're able to identify, oh, yes, I know that device. It really means this, or this means also, or this means this is a really important statement I need to plug in because he used moreover or furthermore or whatever it is that, the device that I'm emphasizing. But I think for the lower grades, I think it's so important that they have that opportunity to practice not only reading it, hearing it, saying it, using it, providing those sentence frames with those devices, having them practice it, and so that until they've acquired it and it just becomes part of their own lexicon, right? So I think that you hit such an important topic in that and this idea of how do we address it, how do we bring it into the classroom. And I think just like in our morning meeting when we ask them to share, framing it and framing the sentence for them and not forcing but repeating it and it's sort of modeling that, right? It's a constant all day modeling with them and really like helping them hone in and pick out those awesome devices. So yeah, that's how I would.
With my children, I try to show them that I bring awareness that there's
Mhm.
multiple meanings. Like at the first grade level, at the very beginning of the year, a lot of I try to show them how to attend to detail in all things. And so when we're doing a basic illustration, and after we label it, if we label the word sun, talk about, okay, well, sun, which sun could it be? And I write actually the two suns. And then I talk about, well, one sun is the sun that's up in the sky, and the other sun is a child. So we look at it's just that awareness. And like we were doing dictation the other day, and one of the words we used was pat. And so they wrote pat on their boards. And I asked them, I'm like, okay, well, what type of P did you use when you wrote pat? And they're like, lowercase. And I'm like, could it also be an uppercase? And they're like, well, why? And I'm like, well, what else could pat be? You could
Mhm.
pat a cat's head, but can it
Mhm.
also be a name? And it's just like bringing that awareness that
Yeah.
exists in words. Another and one last example. I'm sorry, it's just so funny. This is one of my um older students years ago wrote partnered down, the word partnered, and wasn't sure
Mm.
how to spell it, but they wrote PARTNERD, part nerd, instead of thinking of the word partner and then showing the ED at the end. So it's just bringing that awareness on how we think about words. And at the first grade level right now, we're just doing CVC words, but it can still happen at that level. You don't have to wait until you're advanced, but
No, absolutely. Yeah.
orally introduce those academic terms, instead of saying, stand up, maybe sometimes use the word rise or or let's elevate, just
Yeah.
any type of thing, just where you use multiple meanings and multiple opportunities to play with words.
Yeah.
That's so great.
Agreed, and it
So-
makes me think about, like, nice, the word nice, and striking that from the vocabulary and forcing sort of yeah, right? Having them sort of fish for more precise words, right? And really
Yeah.
holding them to that. But it's great because 'cause you're introducing homophones, right? You're introducing sound-alike words and helping build that awareness. So it's so
Yeah.
important.
And it's fun to use. sometimes we use like these maps where we write nice in the middle and then we brainstorm all the different other words that we can use. And then we just use the words in the outer part of the circle. And we don't use like the word you were saying. Good is one of my words I don't like to hear all the
Mhm.
time. It was good. It was cool. It's like, okay, let's strike that.
Yeah.
Let's expand it.
I want to not really shift, but bring another quote to this conversation. So this one is from some work by Robert Marzano and Deborah Pickering. And one of their studies, they wrote, the more students understand academic vocabulary words, the easier it is for them to understand information when they read or hear about the topic. So I want to extend the conversation to, we've kind of talked about this, but vocabulary across content areas. And I'm thinking specifically about math. As much
Mm.
work as we've done in schools, I think, to help teachers understand that every teacher is a reading teacher. You know, we've tried to get
Yes.
that message across. I'm not sure that we're quite there, you know. And just introducing vocabulary in math, because there's tons of obviously content area vocabulary in math. And at the elementary level where I am, I'm thinking about area and perimeter and how we oftentimes in a classroom say those words to students, and we might even have them posted on an anchor chart, but we really delve right into the math associated with those words. And then later we wonder, why are students confusing area and perimeter? And I'm going to hypothesize that their lexical quality of those words is weak. So let's talk about that. Like, how could a math teacher build lexical quality around words like area and perimeter? Or like your own examples?
Mhm.
I would honestly go back to like categorizing, like looking at
Mhm.
groups, like where an area you fill all these things in and then give examples of areas. And then
Mhm.
like perimeter, have them act it out. I think part of not just looking at the word, I mean, like looking at the word
Yeah.
in more ways than one. Try to pull in more senses to it too. Um, and then also with math, I always look at the keywords in the lesson title,
Mhm.
like the title, like the topic. And we look at why those words are important and what other words can we associate with those words. It's building connections.
Right.
Mhm.
So, and I think those things that you're describing, people that, I'm not saying I can't speak for every math teacher, but I think a lot of math teachers see those activities as out of their lane. And I'm going to argue that it should be very much within their lane.
Mhm.
Absolutely. You can't teach math without teaching language. It is very much a language, and it's language that gets utilized again and again. It's not like they're going to encounter it one time, whether it's throughout the module, but essentially we're laying down some building blocks in math and curriculum spiral. So we're going to come back to these concepts and the language again and again. So I think it
Mhm.
has to live not only in their workbooks or in their paperwork, it has to also be project based. It has to be something they can get their hands on, especially
Right.
for coming in, new to English or really struggling with some of the vocabulary. I think that then they really need those concrete examples. So making it about their pencil case, whether what can, bringing them some cool pencils and do they fit in their case? Let's measure, right? Let's talk about what goes in versus how long something is and how much space it takes up versus around it and what can go
Mhm.
in it. Really actually measuring actual boxes, whether it be a shoe box that they bring. I mean, you've got to make it as concrete as possible. And I think once you do that, even if it's so simple as doing it in the classroom with one box or, what fits in my bag? How do
Mhm.
I can bring in one of my mini rolling suitcases and what can I fit in here? What can I? Not thinking about that. So just really making it as real as possible and in context, not just living on the workbook page, I think number one. But I
And
get it.
I
We're so tied to our curriculums and needing to but this is how you do it too.
And I think
Mhm.
you brought up a key point though, is having them talk about it, because
Mhm.
they have to learn through that discussion with each other. And a lot of teachers think there's not enough time for that. but that's an essential part of the learning, having them talk about it, discuss, looking at examples, looking at non-examples, and thinking about the why. And so I think it's okay to build in that talk time and that reflection.
I feel like I'm teaching vocabulary all day long, especially as a math teacher. The program I use is so deeply embedded in all this rich language, and it's not a concept they're just going to see one time, right? We're going to spiral this curriculum. We're going to keep revisiting these words. So I feel like one of the strategies, and I would do this in any content area, not just math, but providing
Mhm.
those summary frames for them, right? So they can have those rich math talks, but also see it in print and use it in print. So when they're doing a math exit ticket, for example, I do require, like, our program is very much redraw, write, redraw, write. So they have to read the problem. They have to, sort of take it apart, dissect it, and figure out their plan for attack, right? But they also need to then model their thinking. They have to, like, utilize the diagramming or the models we've provided, not actual pictorial drawings necessarily, but depending on where they are in their math stages. But then write, we expect them to write a sentence. And so providing them with those sentence frames, you can really double duty on that academic language. You can also practice saying it informally, right? Sort of summarizing it, paraphrasing it, introducing those terms and having them say it in their own words versus saying it with the academic language, right? And then they get that double practice that way too. So you can really use some everyday sort of, run of the mill teacher tricks here, right? I'm not really inventing the wheel here, but we can sort of double duty on these high yield, like,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's a Venn diagram, whether it's them just recording themselves, like turn on the voice memo on their iPads for them or your device. It'll motivate them, and they like listening to themselves and things like that. So interviews, they can interview each other, they can play. You can have fun with it too. It doesn't have to be so, technical all the time, but they do need that technical language
Mhm.
experience. And so that's one way I could do it.
Yeah, and I love that you're talking about it like a language experience and really building a language experience into every corner of your day. And to me, that is building lexical quality, just building in those opportunities for language. Like when you were talking about using props like a pencil case or their backpack and connecting that to math and asking those open-ended questions, we're then building opportunities for language, which then builds up that lexical quality. I
I
was
just
thinking to, oh, go ahead, Andrea.
Well, this got me thinking a little bit about, cross-curricular, what have you. I'm actually a product of whole language in my childhood,
Uh-oh.
and I know
Are we all?
exactly, and we don't go all down that rabbit hole, but I will say I had to learn grammar when I learned French. So I learned how to understand and look at words in a different way as an older child. But that
Mhm.
makes me hyper conscious when I'm teaching, like if in math and you're talking about something, just saying how things agree, how things are
Mhm.
connected, like the noun verb connection. You can do that in math. You can talk about actions across the subject area. So it's important to kind of pull in or take into consideration that knowledge of grammar and how the words fit together, not just which words you choose. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You're talking
Totally.
about also making, like, vocabulary sticky, right? Really
Mhm.
making it stick for them. And so, like, having a second language background, I think we then can also, like, capitalize on that a lot of times and notice, the morphology of a word or a cognator. This word makes me think of that word, and I can speak to that. So when we share our own stories too with language,
Mm.
our experience, that makes it more sticky too for them too, right? And like then it opens up their ideas and they're wanting to share their experience with the word if they have it. So
One of the
bring
things we do calendar every morning, and one of the things we do is we count, and I have them count in English, Spanish, and French.
love it.
Last year I had a student that was Russian, and we learned Russian. So we add in, but one thing we noticed when we were counting, the kids actually picked it up when we said, for French and uno for Spanish. They both start, I showed them how we write it and how that UN means one. And then we started thinking about unicycle. And then
Mm.
they start picking it out. They start seeing it when you kind of draw attention to these things, because I try to tell the kids it's a puzzle. It's a game. We all like
Mhm.
games. Let's look for these patterns and in other places. So as
Yeah.
long as you just draw attention to, at least at the early level, you'll be amazed at the
Yeah.
connections that they draw.
And
Yeah,
I
you're
think that builds this love for language, then it puts them into this language success cycle. Like I
Mm.
was successful at figuring out that word, and that makes me want to figure out other words. That gives me this confidence and this burst of energy, and now being able to like have faith in my own skills to decipher a word. So it puts them into this success cycle.
Mm,
Yeah,
that's
those
awesome.
authentic experiences, right? It can help them internalize the word. So love that you brought that up, Andrea. It's so important. And playing with different language, right? And really
Yes.
helping a student feel part of the community by then including their language too. That has so many other benefits, right?
And just letting them know that there are other languages, like just even for example, like with the word school, when you're spelling school, the ch usually says ch, but in school it doesn't. Well, that's because that came from another language. You don't necessarily have to go into all the history and the depth,
Mm,
but it helps kids, especially like kids that might be more math oriented or logical. They
Mm.
might be like being able to throw that out there, that will help them understand, okay, well, that's not following a pattern because it's coming from a different source. So, I mean, because there's some kids you teach a pattern and they're like, well, why doesn't it work for everything? And so it's nice to give them an outlet of, and then some might want to discover, like when they find that out and you say that, there are kids that might be like, well, let me look that up. Let me find out.
mhm.
And then that starts that conversations with the others.
Yeah. And I think, as you're talking and the level of rigor that you're describing, even within a first grade classroom, I mean, you're describing some really rigorous tasks. It kind of reminds me, or makes me think about some of the heat that science of reading gets. So,
Mm.
we're all science of reading people, but it's always good to hear from the other side. And some of the heat that science of reading gets is around um, that reading instruction becomes too formulaic, that
Mm.
there's not enough higher order thinking, that it's boring. This is just
Or
boring
it's
for students.
phonics.
It's right. And I think when, listening to you guys speak and connecting it back to lexical quality, when we think about lexical quality, we are taking the elements that are important in science of reading and we're connecting them with students. We're connecting the phonology, the orthography, the semantics, and we're doing a lot of higher order thinking, rigorous tasks with students.
Mhm.
So I feel like it's the clap back. Lexical quality is the clap back. So what do you guys think of that?
Oh boy. We could talk at great length about that. I'm glad you also brought that up, though, because you're right. We do bring a level of rigor. The way we're talking today, I'm already excited. Like I can't wait to go back to the classroom and do more of this, right? But apart from that, hearing about the clapback and it's purely phonics based. It's not. We are doing this all day long. We are doing this in every realm possible. And if we don't do it, we only do them a disservice, right? And so I can't help it. I can't help but be that dynamic person in the classroom because I am personally excited about language. I am invested in using precise words. So for me, that dynamic, like it just comes out. I can't not do it. I don't know how not to do it. I'm not going to get up there and just follow the scripted lesson plan. Nothing wrong with a teacher who needs to do that in the beginning, but you still need to infuse your love, your passion for words and what you understand and how you built your own understanding. So I think even
Mhm.
talking about our own experience, our own sort of reading autobiography, if you will, like, or our vocabulary autobiography. When did I start
Mhm.
noticing what words do I like to use a lot? What words am I curious most about? And then helping them hone that academic vocabulary in that same realm, getting them excited to utilize it. Playing reporter, playing
Yeah.
calling them exactly what they are in those moments of learning. You are wordsmiths, you are scholars today, you are artists today, and bringing that language back again. So I'll clap back big time at them.
And I think part of it too is the power of knowledge, not just the power of growing knowledge for the children, but also the knowledge of the teacher. And I think that's something that the more educated we have for the teachers, they can bring that to the children. So we need to have more training kind of showing how to do it and be excited. I think that's the thing. You have to love it and be excited about it. Even if you're not 100% on board, if you put on that excited face, those kids get excited about learning. And there's certain structures that have to be in place. You have to have the classroom management. You have to have the routines. You have to have all that discipline for this to happen. You have to teach them how to communicate with each other before you can have these turn and talks. But the level of knowledge and depth of knowledge should be the goal. Like, the kids should know that they're at school to learn, and learning is amazing. And we can learn about all of these new topics. And when you learn about this topic, you're actually growing your background that's going to help you with this topic, and how it transfers. And I think
Right.
that's an important part, is just getting down to the heart of learning is building knowledge, period. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And it's like, whether it's knowledge about words or knowledge about places or knowledge about this. And I think with science of reading, a lot of times people, like you were saying, think it's all the phonics part. And it's no, that's one piece of the puzzle. They all
Right.
fit together. But the knowledge building is essential for the
Right.
comprehension.
And it can
Absolutely.
start really early. So even in kindergarten classes that I've been to, where they're segmenting the word bat and they're saying b, at, and blending it to say bat, the conversation doesn't end there, right? So how many people can tell me one definition of bat, two definitions of bat, three definitions? Let's use it in different ways. So we can do high level rigorous learning in conjunction with phonics work, with phonemic awareness work. I think science of reading gets that bad rap when we don't think about lexical quality. When we think of learning a word and learning to read just has to do with the phonics and the phonology in general of the word. It is not that. And so when we think about lexical quality, we think about all of the pieces of language. And again, that speaks to the science of reading naysayers, that we are not saying that science of reading means we do phonemic awareness and phonics only. We think lexical quality, which means we're bringing together all of the pillars of the National Reading Panel's recommendations.
Well, wait, I'm sorry. When you were talking about bat and bat, it triggered a thought in my brain. So aside from, like, if you think of the word bat, obviously you think of the baseball bat, a bat that flies. Those are both nouns, but we can also use bat as a verb, like he
Yeah.
bats the ball. Well, one thing I notice, at least when I'm working with some of my readers that struggle a little bit with the decoding, a lot of times they'll leave off the inflectional ending. And I think when you draw attention to the meaning, that the whole word is important. So if you take the word bat, well, and you leave off the S, well, he's doing it right now. Like, we want that S there so we know when it's happening. Or if he's a batter, like, he's the person that's doing the batting. So I mean, it's just like heating and drawing that attention, again, that attention to detail. But kids, that aids in comprehension down the line too, because they're understanding that a word isn't just built up of sounds, but it also has those chunks of meaning. And you don't want to leave off any part of the meaning, any part, because that will, like, change what the author was trying to communicate to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
So
do think that the clapback situation, I mean, we're always going to have the naysayers, but I think you were talking about how much rigor we're bringing to the table when we work with young students, right? It's very dynamic setting. They're young, they need the multi-sensory, so it naturally enables us to really take advantage and offer that vigor, right? That exciting dynamic learning environment for them. But also, I think that we have the research, we have so much body of research, and that's what science of reading is. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what
mm,
science of teaching and science of reading are and are
mm,
not. and how we bring it all to the table. We bring it all.
That's
And
right.
yes, so I think, we are also practitioners. We are teacher practitioner. And I think the more we own that and just go with that, the more people will start to understand that, we actually do have some insight and that we have some body of research behind what we're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, we have really delved into a lot around lexical quality and science of reading. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this conversation?
Final thoughts.
I
Oh.
feel like you just gave us one, Denise. So maybe I'm asking for a final. Denise just gave us the final clap back.
I, I think I have to say, go with those teachable moments,
Yeah.
because that is where a lot of the heart of learning can happen. And it's,
Mhm.
I mean, you can follow your plans, make sure you have your structured ideas of what you're going to do, but
Mhm.
also don't be afraid to follow those teachable moments, because that could trigger a spark in one of
Mhm.
your students to really love literature and love words and love looking for these patterns and connections in all areas of learning.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Denise and Andrea, for joining me in this conversation about lexical quality. I could probably talk about this for another 2 hours, but
Oh,
we're going
absolutely.
to end here. Please join us for the upcoming Teacher Voices on the Science of Reading podcast all about science of assessment. Until next time.